Hey Diz, I want to experiment with something. Uh, Maybe this is a format that we can do a little bit more regularly, since getting together doesn't always work out. So I want to put an idea out. I'm sure you're familiar with this too. I think it's worth revisiting and meditating upon. I was inspired by watching a video recently of this guy, PZ Myers. He's talking about Sam Harris. There's a video of Sam Harris going around just speaking wildly, unhinged about Mamdani, but with a calm, quiet voice, the way he does, that is his style. I think that it's important to remember how that calm, measured, confident, steady voice is a voice that violent psychopaths and abusers often have. And it's because, particularly, someone who is in power and who is accustomed to having power takes their violence for granted as legitimate, as not even really violence. You see that with, for example, the United States bombing countries every year, and it just feels like a normal thing. Um, Israel's treatment of Palestine, that just feels normal to Israel and its defenders. Uh, and, you pair that with the opposite, which is the voice of people who are used to being abused and looked over, insulted, not respected. And sometimes when they speak of their abuse, there's a tone of weakness that is kind of despised in our society. It's judged to be emotional and irrational. And yet, calm zealotry is emotional and irrational. It's just not, particularly when it comes to being emotional, it's not what we think of as emotional. We don't think that someone calm is being emotional, but there's no avoiding emotions. And the emotions that are associated with confident dominance are not irrelevant. And they also can motivate people, like Sam Harris in this particular example, but he is, one of many people, um, into quite delusional ways of thinking. And so I'm going to go ahead and play Sam. And what I want to do is I want to show, like, you just modify his language a little bit. And what I think is so interesting is that it applies so perfectly to him in reality. And yet, here he is going off in this delusional way. And he's talking about Mamdani and how easily you can turn it around on him. So here is the voice of Sam Harris speaking about Mamdani. And while listening to this, let's meditate on the reality of an unhinged voice of a violent zealot, sounding calm and steady and quietly confident.
He's not the equivalent of Trump. He's a very different sort of character than Trump, right? Um, but also one who we should want nothing to do with politically. I think he's an actual. I think he's a sinister figure. I think he's a none too closeted um, Islamist or at minimum apologist for an apologist for Islamists. He's not. ethically sane by my lights at all, though he can seem to be somebody who really just cares about, people who are finding it hard to make ends meet in New York, right? But if you double click on many of his political allegiances and the kinds of things his wife likes on social media and all of that, what you get is a picture of someone who's captured by a fairly sinister, uh, theocratic agenda and an anti-Semitic one. This is not about garbage trucks and uh, cleaning up Central Park and really helping the city. The thing that really seems to animate him are these um, political concerns that don't have a lot to do with being mayor and have a lot to do with Israel and Islam. He's not the worst person you might find in that vein, but he's far too close to being a shill for Islamist theocrats than I would want running a major American city, to say nothing of our government, right? So if we had a Mamdani character who was a viable presidential candidate who had these kinds of ties to obvious anti-Semites and Islamists and Muslim Brotherhood adjacent evil, I would find that genuinely terrifying.
Okay. Now, let's take basically his same language, certainly the same formulation. We're going to modify the language a little bit. It's going to be about Sam Harris. So, what was untrue and unhinged and the construction of a violent zealot that the audio of Sam Harris epitomizes, let's apply it to Sam Harris and use it to speak truth. So, Sam Harris, he's not the equivalent of Trump. He's a very different sort of character than Trump, right? But also one who we should want nothing to do with politically. I think he's an act, and I do. I think he's a sinister figure. Don't let the fact that I'm using his language mislead you. I do think Sam Harris is an act. I do think he's a sinister figure. He's an open Zionist, and at minimum, an apologist for genocide. He's not ethically sane by my lights at all, though he can seem to be somebody who really just cares about careful and honest deliberation. But if you look into his political allegiances and his history on social media and his website, what you get is a picture of someone who's captured by a sinister imperialist agenda and a zealous anti-Arab and anti-Muslim one. This is not about meditation and rational conversation and detached analysis. The thing that really seems to animate him are these political concerns that don't have a lot to do with Enlightenment values, and they have a lot to do with white supremacism and Zionism. He's not the worst person you might find in that vein, but he is too much of a shill for Zionist warmongers than I would want having a philosophical influence over a large audience, right? And we've had Harris characters become president who have these kinds of ties to obvious white supremacists and Jewish supremacists, Zionists, and, Likud adjacent evil, like right now. And it is terrifying. It's crazy, isn't it? How confident abusers and violent, unhinged people can be in their righteousness and not question. I mean, here's a man who actually has worthwhile things to say about meditation and the neuroscience around meditation, and yet he has, I think, no insight into the violence and unhinged nature of his own mind.